This is the Gospel according to Mark chapter 13. As Jesus walked away from the temple, one of his disciples said to him, Look at that stonework, those buildings." Jesus said, "You're impressed by this grandiose architecture? There's not a stone in that whole works that is not going to end up in a heap of rubble." Later, as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives in full view of the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew got him off by himself. And they asked, "Tell us, teacher, when is all this going to happen? What sign will we get that these things are coming to a head?" Jesus began, "Watch out for doomsday deceivers. Many leaders are going to show up with forged identities claiming, 'I am the one.' They will deceive a lot of people. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, keep your head and don't panic. This is routine history and no sign of the end. Nation will fight nation and ruler fight ruler over and over. Earthquakes will occur in various places. There will be famines, but these things are nothing compared to what is coming." So here's a sermon. I'm going to try and be fast. A few years ago, I was visiting my sister in Chicago, and she was living in downtown Chicago with lots and lots of skyscrapers. And I remember being amazed looking up at all these skyscrapers and just being impressed by all the different layers. And it's kind of like today. Not only are the disciples impressed by the stonework of the temples, stone upon stone, but they're also impressed at these grandiose architecture. And then Jesus makes this prediction that not a stone will be left on top. It's all going to come to a heap of rubble. Nothing but empty stones, no longer one on top of the other. Nothing. It's all coming to an end. On top of that, he says there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. They got all of this just from looking at a building like this, the temple. A lot of layers to this story that I just read. But one of those layers is, if we think about the building, that's quite of a massive undertaking of taking down that building. But even more than that, it's kind of impressive that Jesus could make all these predictions until you stop and think about it. If you stop and think about it, it doesn't seem all that impressive. Even I could make some of those predictions, right? So for example, I could say, in the next 6 months, there are going to be earthquakes in various places. Well, yeah, there's earthquakes all over the world, all the time. Some of them are really, really small, and others are big. So my prophecy would be fulfilled in that way. And if I say nation will rise against nation, ruler against rulers, wars, come on, we just have to look at the Middle East, if anything. But let alone right here in America, especially with the civil rights that are in question right now. If you ask any African American about ruler upon ruler, nation against nation, they'll probably be the first to tell you, "Yeah, your prediction's right, Pastor Jake." Or, "What about this prediction about famines?" Well, I could make that prediction right now, and we know that not everyone in this world is going to be fed, even tomorrow, let alone 6 months out. So when you stop and think about the layers of this gospel, it doesn't seem that significant until you go a little bit deeper. If you go a little bit deeper and you ask the question, what if Jesus is just talking about worship? What if he's not talking about the building per se? And he's pointing out that no longer are people just going to be worshiping here. This is no longer the number one place people are worshiping. Instead, everyone's going to worship anywhere they want. Where two or more are gathered, that's where people are going to worship. Well, that's a pretty significant case. On top of that, we hear at the very end of Mark, the curtain temple, that divide that separated God, the holiest of holies, from the rest of the world. Well, that didn't work very well. It's torn in two, which means God's on the move. God is no longer confined to one time or place. God can be all over. Well, that's quite a prediction. That's something pretty significant. And then if we take it even deeper than that, we can realize, what if Jesus is talking about himself? Not a stone will be left on a stone. This reminds us, of course, of Jesus, of John's Gospel, where Jesus is speaking about himself. But what if he is speaking about himself? What about wars and rumors of wars? Well, it was very clear in Mark's Gospel that there was a lot of different groups who were not getting along with Jesus and Jesus' mission. Certainly the Jews who tried to put him to death, certainly the Romans who executed him. But even the rebels, those people who didn't like the Roman occupation, but they violently wanted to fight back, and Jesus said, no, we're about peace here, not violence. So there's a lot of conflict involved in Jesus' death. So the building is his body. Yeah, that gets destroyed. There's lots of wars, rumors of wars. What about the earthquakes? Well, it just so happens, at the end of the gospel, we hear about an earthquake as Jesus dies. And the temple curtain is torn in two. There, that's more like torn in two. A lot of layers there. But even more than that, what about the famines? Throughout Mark's Gospel, we hear about Jesus who has come to feed the hungry. We realize this isn't so much about Jesus' predictions. What if this is about Jesus? Even more than that, in the Gospel reading right before this, we hear about the widow who has 2 coins, and she gives those 2 coins to the temple. It's her entire life savings. It's everything she owns. Those 2 coins that she places in the offering basket at the temple. And then the very next story we hear about this magnificent temple. And Jesus says, not a stone will be left on a stone. That's not that significant. What's significant here is the woman. And we realize there's going to be a shift. Worship and God is no longer about this magnificent building. It's about the people like this woman. So there's all kinds of different layers. In the same way, there's all kinds of different layers for each and every one of us. Each one of us has different layers of who we are. Different layers of how we spend our time, where we spend our time, who we spend our time with, how we exert our energy, where we spend our energy, and even our money. Those are all part of us. They are all part of the different layers that make up who we are. So what's the point of all this? Well, here's the point I came to. The point is, there are many different layers in this world. God has created many different layers just in this story. But in each one of us, there are many different layers. In the faith communities that we are part of, there are many different layers. In the world that we live in, there are many different layers. And most of all, there are many different layers to who God is. I hope and pray that as we think about these layers, we may feel inspired to explore and share these layers of ourself, the layers of the communities that we serve, the layers of the world, and most of all, that we may feel inspired to explore and to share the many different layers to who our God is. Amen.